Hello again. Everybody's just filtering, so we're gonna plow on, as I say. This is an interesting panel. It's about the service layer. It was interesting having the calls with the various panelists, and some, we had some interesting conversation, some pushback on the idea of the new service layer. But we're just going to get into the weeds of this because it's actually quite an interesting subject, because there's a bunch of conversation to have here around fragmentation, application of data and technology, new business models, and where the service is going in terms of helping clients. So I want to start with you, Izzie, because it's an interesting time for our space. Like, regardless of how you see, the relationship between the client and the agency or the service layer, things have dramatically changed in our space, right? We are in a new age, regardless of how you want to kind of look at it. Fragmentation is here. We see new channels appear all the time. You could argue that TikTok wasn't around 3-4 years ago. Nobody's seen that Google got rid of, the cookie. Apple have gone on a privacy, quest, crusade, if you will, getting rid of IDs on their own devices, making sort of like scale marketing sort of harder. So I want to talk about that just as a starting point, because it is interesting.
Just that.
Just that. But it definitely frames the conversation we're going to have here now. Like, so how do you think that has actually changed, how the service layer works? And by the way, I'll just do a definition of the service layer. I need to do this before I start. In the sense that I actually did this sort of ecosystem map. We have the service layer, which includes sort of holding groups, agencies, consultancies, ad networks. You have the mad tech middleware, where technology, ad tech vendors, mad tech vendors, and then you've got the sort of like media piece. And there's serious overlap with all three, by the way, right? Nobody's sort of agnostic. But let's start, Izzie, on that after that little sort of introduction.
Okay, great. Well, you were talking about fragmentation, right? And we've all seen a lot of that. So let's start there. We had fragmentation of MarTech and AdTech. We've been talking a lot about that. We've had fragmentation of staff. Everybody's working from different places, different countries, different locations. And we're also seeing fragmentation of services within clients as well. We're seeing some interesting situations where clients are taking certain things in-house. I think there's an element of control there, especially around data, so owning their first-party data. We've talked a lot about that, wanting to keep that safe and secure and know who their customers are and who they're re-engaging. So that's a lot of fragmentation. And the reason I think that massively impacts the service layer is it impacts how we resource them. So you need different skill sets and different numbers of people within, I can only speak for agencies, not for anything else. In agencies, you need lots of different skill sets to be able to rotate in and out of client needs in order to deliver what's going to actually have a business impact for the client, based on how they've orchestrated their own technology, their own brand campaigns, demand campaigns, whatever it is. So fragmentation and this always-on change that we're seeing, I think, is definitely driving, as you term it, a new service layer.
Zuzanna, you're in an interesting position, because obviously you've gone to work for, you went from Google, boo, to sorry, no way, stop that, no, don't be booing at Google, to Xaxis, right? And Xaxis are going through an interesting sort of change, reflecting this new world, because there's a whole raft of things you guys are doing, from the execution piece, from the creative piece, to sort of tech integration. So is this current environment propelling sort of the change that you're seeing at Xaxis?
Yeah, so perhaps I'll say it's not a new service layer from our perspective. We've been in the market for 10 years providing innovation and service excellence and programmatic. So it's not necessarily new. We heard it earlier. Is it changing? Is it evolving? Absolutely. There is always going to be discussion around fragmentation, but I also think we should look towards the sophistication and the advancements that are happening around technology and media. And the service layer really needs to continue to evolve to that. So to give you an example from Xaxis' perspective, 2 years ago we launched Xaxis Creative Studio to address the really needed demand of improving the creative execution alongside the increasingly fragmented media buying. Then last year we launched a strategy and planning division, again building out our capabilities from the ability to really sort of challenge and interact with the brief, but actually taking us up the funnel in terms of our conversations with our clients and our agencies, so that we're no longer just getting sort of the end result. We're actually sitting down at the table and discussing, what is your problem? How can we bring our creative capabilities, our strategic and planning capabilities, our innovative media buying capabilities to bear for you? So we continue to build out what our service is. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily new. It's an evolution.
I'll let Lucy jump in here, because she was quite adamant about the title of this panel about new service layer. She put me straight. So, Lucy, let's attack. Let's go.
I mean, attack is pretty strong, but I'm completely with you, Zuzanna. When I read about this, I thought, agencies have always been there to provide a service layer between the complexity of the market and the ultimate client goal. So it seemed an interesting, not to attack your article, because all is a very beautiful hypothesis that you have there, Ciaran. What I do think is interesting is your point about the fragmentation, and I'll pick up on what Izzie said about fragmentation within client side. I think it's incredibly generous, Izzie, and probably a mark of the fact that you work with B2B, that you think that in-housing has been driven by ownership of data. I think it's been predominantly driven by lack of trust. So agencies perhaps haven't got a new service layer, but the ability to fragment and pull apart what agencies typically would have owned wholesale and say, we're going to take that in-house because we don't believe that our pricing is correct, we don't trust the potentially murky black box practices that you're delivering internally in your agency, forces us to somewhat clean up our act. And the service layer becomes much more about genuinely, compatibly understanding what the client wants from us and being able to service them in a custom way.
We'll come back to that business model things in a minute, because that's quite an interesting one, development. But Tim, coming back to the differentiation that some entities within the service layer need to have. Like you put it very nicely, actually better than I did, talking about sort of the evolution of the execution piece, right? So the first sort of wave of programmatic execution was managed service and ad networks. The second wave was more or less putting in your money to DSP, and now we've kind of migrated to this interesting customized play around supply path optimization, owning the relationship with the publishers, and the integration piece, which is very interesting. So is that where we are right now in terms of sort of differentiating? Because it brings up a lot of things, because obviously that relationship is important between agency and client, but that technology piece needs to be a differentiator.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about fragmentation. I don't see right now is a time for fragmentation and programmatic. I think we're closer to consolidation, right? Ask any agency trader what platform they use, and they'll have 2 or 3 answers, right? 2. Yeah. Well, 2.5.
2.5.
So that era of fragmentation, we'll call it the second era of programmatic, when you had 10, 15 DSPs coming into your agency, pitching you, saying, use us for this. We have this differentiation. That's gone now, right? There's parity at the DSP space. And all the traders, if they're using the same platforms, it's very difficult to differentiate with your media trading practices, right? So you differentiate through data, you differentiate through other services, and you differentiate through owning your supply. The agency service layer, the role has always been, and I completely agree, it's always been advocating on behalf of clients, helping clients to navigate disruption and complexity in the ecosystem. And I think that the programmatic complexity of yesteryear, of what DSP do we use and what SSP do we use, all of that's kind of constricting at the moment. And where it's going to blow up again is, how do we achieve the same goals that we are aiming for with a different set of rules around identity, with a different set of options around media formats? Buying display and buying AR, VR are going to be completely different skill sets. And when it comes into these new environments where media needs to be purchased, the last thing that we're going to be looking at is, what DSP are we using to buy in an AR environment or a VR environment?
Can I just jump in on that?
Yeah.
'Cause I think there's just one thing missing there, which is the technology, absolutely, and the advancement, but it's there to do a job, and ultimately that service layer sits on people. And I think that's absolutely critical to understand that, there has been an evolution. It's also an evolution of how we bring people into the business, the type of skill sets that we're hiring. You touched on that earlier, the training that we put people through. And I think that's really what differentiates where we're heading and what we're capable of doing, just as much as, what technologies are available in the market.
I want to talk a bit about the business model, because this is quite interesting, right? So, Izzie is put the point that she actually left the agency world to set up her own agency in the B2B space, because she was frustrated with the sort of the media remuneration model for agencies, which I feel is a tough one to keep going, you know what I mean, particularly in percentage of media spend. But I want to talk a little bit about that, and Lucy, you can chime in on this as well, because obviously you'd have an opinion on that. But Izzie, talk about your journey, because it's important. This is what I like about this part of the business, because it is evolving, right? We you know, regardless of the technology piece and the last click attribution that literally the entire digital space was addicted to for 10 years, and all we did was feed Google a pile of money, and we'll keep that aside for later conversations. But the business model has always been an interesting one from an agency point of view, Izzie. So let's talk about your journey in building that new model, and it's quite an interesting model.
Yeah, so I suppose somebody very smart on the stage in the last session said that programmatic has been built on a hack on a hack on a hack, which I thought was an interesting description. And I would say that a lot of larger agencies, which there's very smart people there, Lucy, I'm not trying to shoot them down, a lot of large agencies have designed their resourcing based on a specialism, as those specialisms became important. And you end up with very large agencies with different matrix organizations that have been bought. You have programmatic specialists, social specialists, search specialists, and everybody sort of divided into these own little camps, and they have their own P&Ls. And I was in a very frustrating situation when I worked at my last company before I started Realm, very large international organization that rhymes with Wentsu. And I was on the board there. We won a large client, brilliant client, and they said to us, right, Izzie, so the retainer is what, 3.1 million a year. You need to hire 90 people, deploy it globally, and you need to tell us exactly what members of staff this client is going to need in 3 years' time, broken out across specialisms, because the P&Ls are all different. So we need to tell the programmatic company what they're getting. We need to tell the, you know, the offline team what they're getting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I just thought, well, that just seems crazy to me. How am I supposed to know what channels or what tactics or what skill sets are going to be required for the next load of campaigns and KPIs, let alone what they're going to need in 3 years? So I thought, let's look at the market, see what the market's doing. So we did had a load of conversations with a load of friends of mine who happened to be lovely CMOs. And they said, we just need more agility. We don't want to pay for resources that we're not using in current campaigns. We need more accountability for the business metrics that are happening. And there is sort of a movement, and I'm speaking again specifically for B2B here, because that's the area that I work in. I don't know where consumer is. In B2B, there's much more gathering around the client's needs and what they need to actually do. So there's much more dynamic resourcing coming. There are less managers, more doers. Now that the offices are not as important to us, you can really see people's contribution to work based on what they're actually doing, not presenteeism in the office, for example. So we are seeing team structures change, and we're built on a dynamic model. We have full-time staff that work with the clients to understand their business objectives, specialists that we rotate in on a more agile format, and then we lean into contractors. Now, I was telling you about a friend of mine who works in Australia. She's one of our contractors. And she works for 4 companies now doing advertising deployment in Sydney, and she makes $420,000 a year, and she made $80,000 a year before the pandemic started. So I don't think she's going back to full-time work anytime soon.
Serious tax now, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, she should move to Singapore. I mean, that is fascinating. I mean, that sort of metrics piece is interesting. Zuzanna, you're on the outcomes-based stuff, because you've kind of shifted towards that as well. I mean, that's been a big feature for you guys.
Yeah, I think that's a real change as well, the way that the service layer is priced or compensated. And we have certainly seen a real appetite and shift to business outcome-focused competencies. So, for instance, take Ford, for example, where our actual business outcome is shifting cars on the forecourt. And so as a service layer, we are bringing all of the capabilities of Xaxis to bear to drive that ultimate result versus, you know, a commission-based revenue setup, etc. So I just think there's a real appetite from clients to have more outcome-based results and look at the services and evaluate the services they're getting on that basis.
Lucy, you seen that as well from your end?
I think we're catching up. I think there's still an old guard to be tackled. Both, I will confess, I think in certain parts of the agency world as much as there is in client side, where I think that they're concerned that talking about, you know, as long as people are doing the work within the time that they're given is somewhat equated to, you know, when you think about a liquid moves to fill the space it has. So if you say, actually, you've got a bit less time, people will just do less work. I don't believe in this at all. And I also want to create some sort of embargo on talking about being in the office or not being in the office in panels. I just don't fucking care. Sorry.
Do they know you're on a panel right now?
There's no wine for you later.
I know. I was talking to Izzie about this beforehand. You know, we had a whole piece that we were talking about culture, and somehow it became about whether or not people are in the office. And the two things bear no relation. It means we're not having successful conversations about, to your point about what is the world of agency now, not just in terms of the product of the service layer and how we, you know, create a really successful product for clients, but also how we attract talent in a space where we know there's been such a proliferation of different roles and careers and jobs in the last few years that I think a lot of people are going, well, where's all the talent gone? Well, they've gone to all different clients that have grown up in the last few years. So we have to create a better space. And so sorry, this is probably a complete diversion.
No, it's interesting because you're talking about the dynamic of the sort of what you offer as a service partner needs to evolve in the sense that you can't keep doing the same thing, and you know, the stuff you're talking about, product development and sort of evolving that relationship with the client, and obviously allowing your staff to gain new skills and all the rest. Because let's be honest, agency work, it's a hard job, right? It's attritional. And during COVID, there's been a lot of people who have left the service layer, if you will, because of lifestyles. Some have gone and opened some coffee shops or selling some beetroot burgers that we had down in the lunch. You know, it's a different thing. But do you think this lends itself to kind of like evolving what you do and how you work with the clients helps things?
Evolving, but also coming back to the original plan, which was about, to Zuzanna's point that you made, really understanding and fulfilling clients' needs. And, you know, I've gone in to be leading strategy, and it's really crucial that we come back to really understanding what is the business need, how do we get under the skin of culture, what do consumers actually want in this day and age, really asking those questions in a way that is not muddied by data but enriched by data, being able to understand what the brief into the technology companies needs to be to really get to the right answers, and also to be able to uncover and fulfill the business objectives.
Just to build on that, because I'm onboarding into Xaxis. This is week 6 for me, and I've been...
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I've been doing the rounds, meeting all the agency CEOs and CIOs, and absolutely, to your point, one thing is coming through loud and clear. I ask them about, you know, what does their ideal service excellence looks like, and it comes down to partnership, which is based on open communication and trust, and that's not new. That's been there from the outset. So, again, taking all the complexities and fragmentation, enabling them and simplifying them, and building and working off, you know, the expectations that have always been around servicing.
Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the key part of this, in order for it to be effective, a lot of people, we've had a lot of really smart people on stage say lots of really smart things about how they want the business to work, but these people don't make the business work. It's the traders, it's the planners, it's the folks entry level and manager and below that are actually operationalizing the business.
I actually didn't expect this to happen. This is good information. So, like, we have a talent issue in the industry. Is that what you're saying?
100%. I was talking to one of our agency partners a couple of months ago, and they said, our trading team has been devastated. And I said, why can't you hire more traders? And they go, well, usually we hire a trader with 2 years experience. And 2 years ago, all of the agencies went on hiring freezes, all of them asked for voluntary salary sacrifices, and the industry has not manufactured the talent that they usually go and poach. And there's this massive talent deficit. And what you have is at the C level, there's lots of really good ideas coming, and I think that transformation is happening. But we talked to an agency the other day that had a really innovative idea, and they've been trying to push it through and get the planning team to sign off on it. At the end of the day, they didn't get it, and we said, what happened? What happened to the innovation? They said, well, the planning team just recycled what they did last year, because that worked, and they didn't have time to think about anything else.
And that, for me, that pretty much sums it up. I think I completely agree with everything you're just saying, and therefore, so I agree in principle with what you lovely guys are saying around everybody's got a vision, everyone's got a dream, everyone knows how they want their company to have a service layer. They talk the strategy, they talk the good game about that, but ultimately, if you don't have enough staff working flexibly that aren't burnt out and working 80 hours a week, you can't live that quality work that gets delivered to clients that people feel proud of, that gives them that autonomy and flexibility that powers it.
Yeah, and I think we've got to do better at helping people review and see media as a real career, and see technology as a career, to think about with junior members of staff, not just what's your next promotional solution, but I'm really, really hot on this because I think as an industry we really lack versus some other industries. What's your long-term ambition? And if you don't know what you want to be, how can I help you understand what you might want to be? And that might be sort of really blunt hammer hierarchical. Do you want to be CSO? Do you want to be CEO? Do you want to run your own business? But more importantly, what would you like to fulfill and achieve with your career? Because at the moment, our entry-level salary is still about what you can get if you work really hard in an Amazon warehouse. And it is.
But isn't that the case that the vendors would take you out for expensive lunches, take you down to Cannes, pay for your bar bill. And during COVID, you couldn't do that.
You've got to have time.
Yeah, I know. But Zuzanna, this is it, because you've worked, on the vendor side and now.
I've taken to people to Cannes. This time I'm taking.
Of course, yeah. You're flying them on a TUI flight with Ozzy. He came back from Jamaica. So how do you fix that situation? That is a big problem.
It is, but I think, and I say innovation on two fronts. Firstly, the promise of automation, and we're making steps and we're getting there, and automating the simple tasks. AI has been, great for that, really taking some of the heavy lifting out of that campaign activation. So freeing up people to spend more time on more interesting things. And then secondly, innovation around how you're actually using your resources. And so, for instance, in Xaxis, we are increasingly offshoring. So we have a team in India, we have a team in Poland that we're really heavy leveraging for, again, some of the more repetitive tasks to make sure that the bums on seats we have in the UK, we're freeing them up to do more strategic thinking, more of that creative planning. And I think, we have to, as a service layer, move in that direction, not just sit and rinse and repeat the way that we've operated before.
Yeah, I agree, but I also think to build on that, it also starts at the top. It's a business model issue in as much as it is fixing the actual resourcing on the bottom. So, for example, holding companies have it tough because they've got a lot of overheads and a lot of people taking their big bonuses, and there's a lot of things that have to be paid for before it trickles down to the staff. In really, so I mean, I'm very proud that the business model that we're setting up, we've thrown the normal margins out the window. We've agreed that we'll spend 70% of everything we earn on staff, and we'll make sure that we're paying them above decent wages, and that we're not overloading them with too much to do, because we have the freedom, not being a holding company and being a small startup, to do that, right? But
I'll get my hand slapped for this, but I do blame the brands for racing to the bottom on rates.
Oh my God!
Right, you have a lot of agencies that will pitch and win big business at a loss, and how are you supposed to innovate when you're intentionally understaffing your teams for the marquee of being able to say, I have this blue chip brand in my portfolio?
But that does come back down to the metrics we work to, right? A lot of brands will be bonused on how many clicks they got from a campaign, like the last click attribution. Let's not blame the brands. Let's blame Google. Let's be honest. Come on. Come on, fuck's sake, it's Google's fault.
You've said Google 3 times now, Ciaran.
Yeah, I know, but I didn't get a chance to speak about them all day. It's my favourite topic. I should do a panel on Google. But this is coming back nicely, segued nicely back into our technology piece. Last attribution, right, was a big issue, right? If we're moving away from that, that's a good thing for the service there, clearly. You can start thinking about, to your point, Zuzanna, about the creative. It's amazing that the creative has actually come back into vogue after 10 years of one-to-one marketing. That creative is more important than ever. But it changes the dynamic, and maybe that helps the agency, the agency and the service model, because then you start thinking about, okay, the brands can't do that anymore. They have to start thinking about more progressively about how they measure. It's not all about the last click. It's not all about measuring against a view back window using cookies, which now is impossible.
Yeah, no, I would say we're still talking very much down here about the final execution component. And again, if you use Xaxis as an example, where we're innovating in service goes significantly beyond just the activation. We're looking at sustainability and what are we doing there in terms of delivering sort of fewer impressions more effectively by lowering that carbon footprint and making sure that we can speak to our suppliers in a way that we can actually measure and communicate to them around that. We're looking at diversity in our media portfolio, so not just putting it into the sort of mainstream media, making sure that we're being representative of ultimately the modern British audience that we're communicating to. We're looking at effectiveness from a data perspective, but not just to be compliant, but also actual data ethics and the ethics around using data. And we have a data ethics compass that we leverage. So what the point I'm trying to make here is that it's not just about the final component, that final execution. If you have a good service partner and an advanced service partner, they are looking future forward and helping you ultimately as a brand and advertiser to have a better positioning and a better stature in what you're doing and with your consumers beyond just your actual campaign metrics.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think it's incumbent on whomever is in the service layer, be it from the technology side or be it from our side on the agency piece, to be quite bullish about being able to genuinely have a conversation with the client about, here are your objectives, you're telling us it's this, but you're also saying you want to measure that. Now, if that is what you're bonused on, we can measure that. But don't measure your objectives against that metric. Put that metric in the mix. Use that metric as a factor for, tweaking, optimization, A/B testing, etc. There is nothing wrong with some of that data. It was there initially to help us understand short-term performance. What, of course, has happened over time is a proliferation of this data has clouded people's judgment. A heavy investment into the big tech companies has meant that there has been an over-index against the kind of view of that, and also it's been something really tangible that people have been able to say, I'll put my name on that number because if I can make that lower, then I can get a bonus. And of course we've had, the likes of Binet and Field, my own team in Central, Mark Holden from PhD, banging their heads against a brick wall and going, but you are totally eroding your brand equity because you are focusing on the wrong things and you are not really looking at what the future of your brand looks like. So we have to be bullish about going back and saying, you're doing the wrong thing, but this is the right thing and we can help you get there in X, Y, and Z way.
Yeah, I think we have to get brands comfortable with the idea that attribution is going to change. I think the first panel today was really encouraging. You have a lot of level-headed people saying, okay, we don't need deterministic attribution to every single event that happens to understand our business outcomes, to understand, did this campaign move the needle? Did I engage with my audience and my consumers in the way I needed to? And I think agencies have a huge role to play in getting brands and brand managers comfortable with that and still making sure they hit the click goals to get their bonuses.
+1 to what you just said.
The bonus season is very important, though, for marketers. Izzie, I'm going to put a question to you because we spoke about this on the call as well. I mean, the amount of new entries into the market, into the service there has been kind of like you were talking about in your own industry, the B2B space. Literally, you said you could count on one hand the last agency that's been built in that world for 10 years. But are we seeing now, sort of, with sort of like, the movement and thought around, technology or the relationship with the client and the sort of monetization model, we're going to see new entrants into the service. That we'll see new companies adding some new value. So whether it's a technology specialist or a full service agent with an innovative model in terms of remuneration, are we going to see more companies move into the space?
Yes, I do think so. I particularly, actually, not my industry, but in creative agencies, I'm seeing a lot of boutique creative agencies pop up, and I think that's linked to a conversation that was earlier about the importance of format. Now that we're talking a lot more about contextual campaigns and inspiring people to get back behind things, and I think there's actually an increase in brand activity right now across the board. I'm seeing brand budgets increase versus demand. We're back on that wave as people are trying to sort of capture hearts and minds post-pandemic. We're back there again. So I think, creative agencies, I'm seeing a bunch of them pop up with lots of different skill sets. Media-wise, there's a few, but it's very difficult to set up a media company. You need to have a lot of network people that are willing to sort of guarantee you the publisher rates and...
I've just realised we've run out of time. Actually, have we run out of time? Yeah, I just want to continue, just finish up this creative piece because it's really important. Like that, I know that it's great that these going to be new entries, but like the creative piece is making a comeback. It's like if you're talking about boutique creative agencies and suddenly the innovation around sort of the creative, execution is important again.
I don't think creative is just about creative, though. Creativity is not just about creative, is what I should say. Creativity in media, creativity in all the activity that you run, true human insight. I mean, it's something that PhD's won lots of awards for over the years. I'm 5 weeks into role, so I'm still learning to toe the party line, Zuzanna. But absolutely, you know, we've seen it kind of all the judges in Cannes have been going, you know, give us some more sexy, exciting things. But there's also been a wealth of research that has demonstrated that truly creative, you know, memory creating creativity can absolutely over-deliver on creating brand equity for you. So the statistical analysis of the work has been done and understanding of how it delivers for your brief. So absolutely, I think it's really important, but I wouldn't just go, that's the creative's jobs. It's our job. We need to think really about how we deliver the media in a way which is inclusive, reflective of culture, and completely creates the standout we need.
And the role of creative is to tell the brand story in the environment where the creative shows up. And I think agencies at the holding company level really understand that with every mature format. And I think to Izzie's point, we're going to see a lot of boutiques pop up and get acquired within the next couple of years. For every Marks and Sparks story that we heard from TikTok earlier, there's a dozen brands who've done terribly on TikTok because they don't know what they're doing. And as these agencies start to really master this, and it has to be done at that kind of grassroots level, master TikTok, master how to tell a good story in AR that doesn't piss off your customers, how to engage in VR without being offensive, without angering your customers, and without, you know, appearing in the wrong place and telling the wrong story.
Yeah, we'll leave the last word to Zuzanna because she's all about the creative now.
I'm just nodding, and Xaxis Creative Studio is the answer. No, on a serious note, I don't think we're coming back to it. It's always been there. I think now it's becoming more prominent again, and especially around the programmatic space. And as we do have, going back to the earlier chat around fragmentation, the aim and ambition of omni-channel and the complexities with that, you absolutely have to have creatives that speak to every single touch point, every single iteration, and whether that's created by an agency or increasingly by creators and then reused in media as well. So
that was an excellent conversation. Actually, we went through all the iterations of the service there. So I want to thank all of our panelists here. A round of applause here for an excellent panel.